So my name is Lisa, and I've decided to do a video series about Hashimoto's and living with thyroid problems because I feel like it would be helpful. I think I'm going to do this over several days because I could go on and on for hours about my entire experience with Hashimoto's, but that would be incredibly boring and you wouldn't want to watch it all in one sitting anyway. So I'm going to start by saying that honestly that I am 46. I will be 47 in a few months, and I have been dealing with thyroid problems since I was 19. And it's been a very interesting, to say the least, experience because I think that there is a lot of changes there have been a lot of changes that have occurred in dealing with medical issues in the last, I don't know, certainly I have seen more of it in the last 10 to 15 years, but looking back to even when I was a young adult, I think it began to creep up then, and that change has really been, in my opinion, about pharmaceuticals and their work with doctors and insurance companies and their work with doctors. And I certainly don't want to get into any kind of bashing about the way the world works here in the United States and healthcare system, but I feel like my experience has been enough to teach me that I have to take control of what my health is about, and I have to do what's right by me rather than living in the box that's sort of created by the healthcare system. So that being said, I'll give you a little background on where this all started and why. I was in my freshman year of college. I was 18, living away from home, living about 4.5 hours away from home, and I seemed to be doing okay. I had had a very active high school career. I slept very little, like most high schoolers do, but I didn't seem to suffer from it. I had tons of activities. I worked at one point in time 3 jobs and stayed up way too late, got up way too early, and did way too much. But I never really felt like I was falling apart. I went to my freshman year in college and I was doing fine. And in the summer between my freshman and sophomore years, I came home. I was in the process of transferring from one school to another. And I had a series of really odd experiences with what I can only generically call infections. I had an infected spleen, which is quite an odd occurrence. I ended up with a soft tissue infection in my cheek following the removal of 2 of my wisdom teeth, another occurrence that the dentist said was quite odd. And then shortly after my sophomore year started and I had transferred to the new school, I had a kidney infection that landed me in the campus hospital for several days. And none of it made any sense, but at the same time, I was very young and, you get sick, you don't take good care of yourself, and that's the end of that. But later that fall, I really began to not feel well. And the number one way that it manifested itself was I could not stay awake. I would take naps on benches in the sun between classes, would set my alarm on my watch and sleep. It was the way I rewarded myself to some degree. I would leave the campus at the end of the day and go back to my room, my dorm room, and I would have tons of studying to do. And I used to, again, reward myself. If I could get through so many chapters, if I could finish this paper, you can take a nap, Lisa. You can nap for an hour. You can sleep for 30 minutes. I used to come back between classes sometimes if it was a long enough stretch and sleep. It was just a very strange kind of entity or process for me because I'd never really experienced that before. And of course, I gained weight and I wrote all of it off as, too much college, too much of everything going on, the freshman 15, the freshman 20, and, burning the candle at both ends. Finally, when it was time for Christmas break, I told my mom, I can't do it anymore. There's something wrong. I don't feel good. It's just not right. So I went to the doctor and they ran a ton of tests and he diagnosed me with an underactive thyroid and put me on Synthroid. Okay, great. Problem solved. I went back to what I was doing. Things were better. I don't remember them being tons better, but they certainly were not as awful as they had been. I wasn't sleeping between classes and barely able to sort of function. And in the spring of my sophomore year, I came home for spring break, which is typically in March here in Texas. And I'll never forget, I went home for spring break. It's a week long. I went back to school after that week was over, and I could not wear any of the clothes that had been hanging in my closet. Nothing fit. It was, I didn't know to scale, but it was as if I had suddenly just packed on 15 pounds in a week. It was the strangest thing I had ever experienced. So back to the doctor, told him something really weird is going on. He ran some more tests and diagnosed me then with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So the difference is that with an underactive or an overactive thyroid, obviously the pituitary gland is making too much or too little TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, in response to the signals that the thyroid gland is putting out. In Hashimoto's thyroiditis, your body actually makes antibodies against your thyroid and slowly destroys it over time. So at that time, the doctor told me, he said, you'll be on medicine for the rest of your life and you'll probably have to increase as you go. Okay, fine. So it stayed that way, and in that capacity with Synthroid, sort of changing my dose for a very, very long time. I don't remember being 100%, but I don't remember being nearly as bad as I was my sophomore year in college. At one point in time, I have a memory of telling the doctor, I wish I could go back to being the way I was in high school, where I had tons of energy and I didn't have to sleep as much and I was skinnier. And he said, well, we all wish we could go back to high school, and if I gave you that much thyroid medication, your heart would beat so fast you'd probably have a heart attack. Okay, so it just sort of became my lot in life. I wasn't super happy with it, but I wasn't unhappy with it. I certainly felt better than I had in years. So it stayed that way for a very long time. I got married in 1993 after I graduated from college, and there's a certain amount of weight gain and changes to lifestyle that come with marriage, and that's to be expected, I think. And for the most part, nothing changed. Dosage sort of moved around a little bit on the scale until 1998, my first child was born. And I went into a complete fog. I could barely keep my eyes open, and I was working full time, trying to take care of a house. I had a husband at the time who traveled a lot, and it just became a blur. And at the same time, following the birth of my first child and moving into my second pregnancy, which I got pregnant in August or summer of 2001, I also began to experience these crazy hormonal rages. I had PMS to the max. I had previously been on birth control prior to hormonal birth control prior to getting pregnant with my first child, so I went back on it after I stopped breastfeeding her, and it helped to some degree, and life went on. I was pregnant with my second child. She was born in April of 2002, and life once again became a complete blur. Again, I'm chalking it up to having two kids and a house and a husband at the time who's traveling all the time. There's a lot going on. I probably worked at the time probably about 45 minutes from home commute-wise. So on the days where their dad was traveling, it was really hard. I got up early. I took the kids to daycare. I went to work far away. I came back. I picked the kids up. And everything that goes along with having two young children. But one of the things I had opted to do, because we were done at having children, was to have a tubal ligation at the time that my second was born. My first was born by cesarean, not quite an emergency, but close to it. And so my obstetrician wanted to do a cesarean with my second child, and at the time I opted for a tubal ligation. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to throw away the birth control pills because I don't need those anymore, and thank goodness, one less thing to remember. And now I was faced with this situation where I have 2 young children and I don't feel terribly good. Again, I'm in a fog. I want to sleep all the time. I'm gaining weight, and I'm also having these crazy hormonal rages. And I really wasn't really sure what to do. I went to a couple of different gynecologists. One of them tried to put me on, I don't remember what they call it when they market it to women, but pharmaceuticals use Prozac and they rename it Seroquel maybe or something like that. It's basically an antidepressant. I tried to go back on birth control pills, and I figured out a solution that sort of kind of worked for me, but not really. It didn't make me terribly happy. I did not like the way that any of the antidepressants that I tried made me feel. Prozac, Zoloft, anything, Seroquel, whatever you want to call it, that they were marketing towards women, or weren't even. And part of it was I wasn't depressed. I didn't feel depressed. I grew up with a mother who was bipolar. I've seen depression. I know what depression is. I was not depressed. Stressed? Absolutely. Overwhelmed sometimes? Absolutely. But depressed? No. That was not my problem. And so it felt really weird to have to take drugs for hormonal problems that were really aimed at depression when I wasn't depressed, and I hated the way they made me felt. So I ditched that finally completely and just stuck with the birth control pills, trying to make it work. I'm still on the Synthroid, had been since I was 19. At this point in time, I'm probably approaching 35, and I guess I felt like I sort of existed. And in the fall of 2006 is when it finally fell apart. Literally, my health fell apart, and I had to do something different. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that on my next video, about what I did to figure out something different to do, and how that changed my life, and then how I made a big mistake and undid it all. And hopefully you guys like this video, and if you want to hear more about anything specific, let me know, and I will put that in one of my further videos. Thanks.